Hi. Okay, let's talk about a proof that the Earth is a level plane and not a giant ball. You get in these talks with people sometimes, and you want something quick just to be able to say, look, there's an undeniable, easy thing you can understand, and it is a survey. A real-life land survey is done by using trigonometry, using a scope to measure the distance to one location, measure the distance to another location, and using trigonometry to calculate the vertical angle of the drop, and that is how it's done. So basically, let me go through a couple of videos, and then we'll talk about a couple different diagrams and just explain how simple this idea is and how you could just show somebody this video, or you could just draw a little diagram on a napkin while you're sitting out at dinner and show something. It's just such an easy thing once you get it in your mind's eye that a survey would be impossible on a rounded surface. Sea level would have no meaning on as a reference point to a survey, and let's look at why. So let's check this out. I got a couple different videos I'm going to load up.
We use all kinds of measuring tools in our everyday lives. Rulers, protractors, squares, and tape measures, etc. These work fine for small and medium-sized projects, but what if we need to lay out something big, like a road, bridge, dam, or pipeline? Hey, I'm Grady, and this is Practical Engineering. On today's episode, we're talking about one of the civil engineer's most important companions, the land surveyor. And we're going to do a little bit of surveying you can try at home. The science of taking big measurements. And you've probably seen these guys on the side of the road looking through fancy equipment on a tripod. Just about any civil engineering project starts with a survey to determine the legal boundaries between parcels of property, the location of existing infrastructure, and the slopes and topography of the land. Humans have always had a penchant for building big stuff, which means surveying is a career full of history and tradition. Behind every wonder of the ancient world was an ancient geometry nerd who laid out the angles and alignments during construction.
Now let's take this seriously here. Let's talk about, through the history of the world, all of these ancient structures, the Stonehenge, the pyramids, ancient pyramids all over the world. These structures were built using level broad areas, and people knew how to do this. They didn't have satellites and using airplanes flying over using laser beams or anything. It was an extremely basic measurement. So let's just remember that.
Surveying is also how we created accurate maps of the continents, like the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India, which took almost 70 years to complete.
What a trip, huh? So these guys went out on foot, measured all this, and made this. It's remarkable. This is so cool to think about, and that's the way that all surveys are done, and then that's been kind of translated and manipulated into these computer programs, and now they say there's magic satellites giving information when it's all right here. And there are airplanes that can fly over and use laser beams for the topography. That does happen. So, but let's stick with the basics. Let's stick with how, over the history of the world, measurements have been done, and surveys and real life surveyors, take surveys and take their measurements, and how that works, because you see these buttons on the ground. They are markers all over the world to show different elevations above sea level that surveyors use in order to, they call it a home run. They'll make one survey in one area, one survey in another area, and then they home run it back to another pre-existing marker that some other surveyor did. So when this guy's long dead and gone, that land survey and that is accurate compared to everything else that's been surveyed. and it's a big network of different individuals that have basically made this physical measurement over hundreds of years, and it's very cool. So I just love thinking about this, but this is a very, very easy proof. So let me get this going here.
I personally think everyone should aspire to accomplish something in their life that can be prefixed with the words great trigonometrical. The ubiquitous tool for surveying is called a theodolite, and its one job is to measure the angle between 2 points. Combine those angles with distances from a chain or tape measure, and you can triangulate the location of any point using trigonometry. Modern theodolites, called total stations, can not only measure angles but distance as well, and they have onboard computers that can do the calculations and record the data for later use. When you see a surveyor peering through a funny telescope, it's probably a total station, and he or she is probably sighting a reflector to record the location of a point.
Now let's look at another way to look at this and see if this is possible. It's amazing people actually believe this stuff. Like when you actually look at it.
Sea level seems like a pretty easy concept, right? You just measure the average level of the oceans and that's that. But what about parts of the Earth where there aren't oceans? For example, when we say that Mount Everest is 8,850 meters above sea level, how do we know what sea level would be beneath Mount Everest, since there's no sea for hundreds of kilometers? If the Earth were flat, then things would be easy. We'd just draw a straight line through the average height of the oceans and be done with it. But the Earth isn't flat. If the Earth were spherical, it would be easy too, because we could just measure the average distance from the center of the Earth to the surface of the ocean. But the Earth isn't spherical. It's spinning, so bits closer to the equator are thrown out by centrifugal effects and the poles get squashed in a bit. In fact, the Earth is so non-spherical that it's 42 kilometers farther across at the equator than from pole to pole. That means if you thought the Earth were a sphere and defined sea level by standing on the sea ice at the North Pole, then the surface of the ocean at the equator would be 21 kilometers above sea level. This bulging is also why the Chimborazo volcano in Ecuador, and not Mount Everest, is the peak that's actually farthest from the center of the Earth. So how do we know what sea level is? Well, water is held on Earth by gravity, so we could model the Earth as a flattened and stretched spinning sphere, and then calculate what height the oceans would settle to when pulled by gravity onto the surface of that ellipsoid. Except the interior of the Earth doesn't have the same density everywhere, which means gravity is slightly stronger or weaker at different points around the globe, and the oceans tend to puddle more near the dense spots. These aren't small changes either. The level of the sea can vary by up to 100 meters from a uniform ellipsoid, depending on the density of the Earth beneath it. And on top of that, literally, there are these pesky things called continents moving around on the Earth's surface. These dense lumps of rock bump out from the ellipsoid and their mass gravitationally attracts oceans, while valleys in the ocean floor have less mass and the oceans flow away shallower. And this is the real conundrum, because the very presence of a mountain and continent on which it sits changes the level of the sea. The gravitational attraction of land pulls more water nearby, raising the sea around it. So to determine the height of a mountain above sea level, should we use the height the sea would be if the mountain weren't there at all, or the height the sea would be if the mountain weren't there but its gravity were? The people who worry about such things, called geodetic scientists or geodesists, decided that we should indeed define sea level using the strength of gravity, so they went about creating an incredibly detailed model of the Earth's gravitational field, called creatively the Earth Gravitational Model. It's incorporated into modern GPS receivers, so they won't tell you you're 100 meters below sea level when you're in fact sitting on the beach in Sri Lanka, which has weak gravity. And the model has allowed geodesists themselves to correctly predict the average level of the ocean to within a meter everywhere on Earth, which is why we also use it to define what sea level would be beneath mountains, if they weren't there, but their gravity were. This episode of Minute Physics is supported.
Got it. Okay. All right. So, amazing. Just mind-boggling that that sort of thing can be put out there and be serious about it, you know. Okay, so
elevation above sea.
With all that said, in that last video, there were not geodeticists 100 years ago or 200 years ago and all of the topography and the elevations of the world have been mapped out perfectly and logged for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. Okay, so got that. Okay, so these specialized geodeticists, yeah, I'll leave it to your own imagination. Let's look at another analysis of how to calculate elevation above sea level. Okay, and if you see this, don't let anybody tell you that you're dumb and that you're a caveman and that the last video is accurate, because it has to be so elaborate and bizarre and unthinkable to be true. And that's where people get stuck. They get stuck thinking that these authority figures and all this nonsense that they put out there, just complete utter nonsense, is just the way it is. And now there's these space satellites, and that's the way we figured it out. It's just utter lies. So watch this. This is
above sea level and below sea level. In this lesson, I'm using a fish and a bird. The fish's elevation is 12 meters below sea level, and the bird's elevation is 28 meters above sea level. The elevation of the fish is negative 12 meters, and the elevation of the bird is 28 meters. The surface of the ocean or the sea is sea level, or 0 meters. The distance between the sea level and the fish is 12 meters. The absolute value of negative 12 is 12. In other words, an elevation of negative 12 is still 12 meters below sea level. The elevation of the bird is 28 meters. The distance between sea level and the bird is 28 meters.
okay. I'll stop there. There you go. Okay, because sea level is level. It's level. Doesn't curve. It's a constant reference point. Well, let me give you a couple other diagrams and show you what I'm kind of getting at here. If you look online at elevation above sea level, you're going to find a ton of things like this. One came out kind of grainy, but it says sea level. See, look at that. Isn't that flat? It says different ground levels, different elevations above this constant reference point. Okay. Here's another one. Sea level. It's level because water finds its level and it needs a container. So the container is the land, and rising up out of that land are the land masses. Mount Everest, 48 meters above sea level. A constant horizontal level surface giving a constant reference point. All right. I don't want to be rude when I'm saying this. I'm just trying to really hammer this home because it's the most basic thing in the world. Okay. Mean sea level. Okay. Mean sea level actually means level. I put that. I thought that was funny. Look. Here's sea level. Mean sea level. What that means is, the tides go up and down. But the average of that between low tide and high tide is mean sea level, that's your constant reference point. So you can stay on the shore and you can go up to whatever area you want and you can figure out your elevation from this constant flat reference point. Okay. Now I drew a couple diagrams how a survey would be done. There's a real survey in the real world. Okay, here's sea level. Okay. Here's sea level, constant reference point. You got surveyor number 1, surveyor number 2, surveyor number 3. He's got his scope and he's looking out horizontally and then he can take his drop to sea level at any point, here on the seashore or here 1,000 miles out in the ocean. This guy's standing, let's say, at the top of, so let's say he's in the Rocky Mountains up in Denver at United States, 5,000 feet of elevation. He can take his reference point and you can measure it to other markers that other surveyors have made, take his drop to those other markers that this other guy made 100 years ago at 2,500 feet, and calculate the distance and use trigonometry and determine what his elevation is above sea level, which is a flat level constant reference point. Same thing with this guy over here. You can measure this direction to the east coast, or this way to the west coast. You can drop down and find this guy's marker at 500 feet, or you can come all the way out and get back to sea level, which is the same exact level as the other seashore. Like, so if you're in California looking out in the ocean, towards the ocean, and you're looking out, let's say, towards Hawaii, Hawaii is literally at your feet. They like you to think. Let me show you something. Try to keep this short, but basically, they like you to think that Los Angeles is here and Hawaii is way down here, so you're like going upside, you'd be like sideways. So in your mind's eye, you might think that you're actually like having to look through the ground. And this brings up a good point of a compass. This is critical. A compass has to be level for it to spin, right? If you put it off on a tilt, it doesn't work right. Everyone knows that. They may use the compass. So you have it level, and the compass will spin, and it'll go right towards magnetic north. Well, the only way that magnetic north is going the right way is if it was that direction, which would be the center of this plane that we live in. If the North Pole was way up here and you're standing here, you have to look through the ground. You'd be looking like actually in through the ground in order to find magnetic north, because magnetic north is way up here. So you'd be looking like through the ground. So a compass wouldn't work. Not that funny. It's basic stuff. It's super, super basic stuff. Okay. And that's what's funny about it. This stuff is so basic and so easy to get your mind wrapped around. Once you like stop with the illusions and let that brainwashing get out of your mind, it's easy. Okay. Real trigonometry calculations that surveyors use in real life is not possible here. Okay, how are these guys going to take their measurements? This guy, again, he's standing up in the top of the Rocky Mountains. How is he going to determine his reference to sea level? Okay, he goes out this way, and if he takes a drop perpendicular 90 degrees, which is what they use trigonometry, comes down and he hits sea level here. If he goes further out, he's going to hit sea level way out here. It's a completely different elevation. How is he going to determine this guy or come out here and come out to this guy's pre-existing marker? It's ridiculous. Do you think they're measuring from the center of the earth? And that's what, 39, almost 4,000 miles, I think. Here we go, 3958.8 miles to some arbitrary reference point, and then they measure up from there. Or, it's just, is this C curve? There's no constant reference point, because it's ridiculous, because it's not true. I mean, this is just honestly, it's the most idiotic thing. Once you look at it, you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't see that before. It's just the silliest, stupidest thing, right? It's like, so let's say this guy, what is his elevation? Even he's on the seashore. Let's say that he'd like to say he was 500 feet over the ground like the other guy. Well, if he's on the seashore, he measures, what happened? Lost it. Here we go. So if he measures straight down right here, let's say that he's 500 feet from, let's say he was on a little cliffside. If he measures out another 30 miles and takes a drop, there's a 400-foot curvature drop in 30 miles, roughly. Isn't that amazing? So there is no constant reference point. Sea level would have no meaning in a survey or any reference point of elevation whatsoever. Airplanes would never be able to keep a constant elevation. You know, that's a whole other discussion, but I showed you on the last one, if you noticed, I had a submarine. Think of a submarine. This is another extremely basic thing. Submarines have ballasts in them. They're basically bubbles, and they have to get leveled out, and they have to be horizontal with the water, and they float. Like they have to get perfectly horizontal with the water, and then they go. and they can have their periscope up, and they can travel for hundreds of miles without having to trim out the ballasts, and they just keep on going. They can be 10 feet under the water for hundreds of miles. If this thing travels for 30 miles on the alleged curving Earth, it would breach within a matter of minutes because there's 400 feet of curvature drop in 30 miles. So literally this guy would get going for like 2 minutes and then breach and then have to like constantly like, you know, curve the boat down, which is just ridiculous. So that's about it. So anyways, it's an easy proof, man. Extremely, extremely simple stuff. So here's your submarine. This is how a survey works. Okay, straight lines, straight drops, flat sea level. Okay, this is reality. So that's it. That's a little study of real life surveys and this geo I don't even know how to say the word. Anyways, all that stuff is based off of computer programs that were input from real life markers that real individuals put, and then they make these computer programs. Or they can physically fly over a flat Earth. The airplane can fly over a flat Earth in a flat straight line, and then they've got these lasers that can that can detect the elevation because the airplane's flying perfectly straight across that surface, and then they can read from that laser the difference of elevation, and there you go. So take it easy. All right. I will talk to you soon. All right, let me shut this thing off and take care. All right, bye.